Let's go now to Greg Swenson, chair of Republicans overseas this morning. Hi, Greg. I think you're there to respond. Good morning. I don't know whether you just saw Joe Biden's interaction there with Netanyahu. What did you make of it? He did finish by saying the courage, the commitment and the bravery is strong with the Israeli people, but a lot of it I thought was quite difficult to decipher.
Yeah, it was difficult to watch. And I agree with Richard. I mean, what he said from his note cards, what was written for him, I thought was important. And I was impressed, and I've been impressed with President Biden over the last 10 days when he does speak in public. Now, the first 72 hours of the conflict, he was only in public for 3 minutes. And then finally on Tuesday, he did a longer speech, and he's made appearances since. So I think what he said today on the script was good. But when he went off script, it's really embarrassing. And I don't think that gives the Israelis or Netanyahu or America great confidence in his leadership ability. He's clearly not an orator, but now it depends, Bev, what he does, not just what he says. What he says is not very impressive. What he's written, what his staffers write for him is impressive, but now it's what does he do? He's never mentioned Iran in all of these conversations. He's not once mentioned Iran. Anthony Blinken was on the Sunday shows trying to argue there was no direct evidence that Iran was involved, which is obscene. So I think it's a matter of whether they admit their failures of appeasement and do something about them, whether it's with sanctions, whether it's with sending the Seventh Fleet, or in this case, the Gerald Ford Eisenhower. Good move so far, so good.
Greg, this trip is going to be shorter than expected, or at least more limited. There was supposed to be a summit. Jordan's cancelled it after the strike we saw yesterday and into the evening. The White House National Security spokesperson has said Joe Biden will be asking tough questions. What do you expect him to be asking, and how damaging is it that this summit has been cancelled?
Yeah, I mean, of course it's damaging and it's unfortunate. You know, the blame Israel first crowd has indeed blamed Israel first, as usual. And so what I'm hoping is that the progressive wing of the Democrat Party doesn't get to Biden. I think he's shown some patriotism. He's shown some strength, at least with his two announcements last Saturday and Tuesday. The question is, does he stick with it? Or does he let the propaganda machine influence him? And I'm sure he's got people on the left. And frankly, until 10 days ago, one of them was Anthony Blinken, that was very much in the blame Israel crowd. Now, I think President Biden has turned on that. I hope he sticks with it. But I'm sure there'll be lots of pressure after the Jordanians canceling, and I think some pressure from the left and the media. So I hope he sticks with it. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% confident. Usually on issues like this, he says the right things for a few days and then fades 2 weeks later.
Greg, we've seen over the weekend particularly, there were several protests / you might even call them celebrations from pro-Palestinian, some of them pro-Hamas supporters here on the streets of London. What have those sorts of protests been like over in the States, and which cities have seen the biggest presence?
Yeah, it's a great question. Mostly in New York, and then you have some immigrant populations that were protesting in places like Minneapolis, Detroit, which are known for some of that type of pushback. The most troubling, frankly, was at the universities. And that's what I think really upsets people in America, both conservatives and Democrats and liberals. You know, this is not something that we like to see, that, you know, Ivy League university presidents not supporting Israel or having sympathy with Hamas. As you all have said earlier in the segment, you could be very sympathetic with the Palestinian people, but any sympathy or any support for these savages, for what they've done and what they have been doing for years, is really sickening. And I think you're seeing pushback on that. Frankly, a lot of the big donors, big philanthropists in the U.S. have pushed back against Harvard, against University of Pennsylvania. So that's refreshing to see, because, and you know, this is really outrageous to see that kind of support. And so it's happening in the U.S. It's probably not as dramatic as it is in London, but definitely happening in smaller scale.
OK. All right, Greg. Thank you for joining us this morning from Miami.